So I have a lot of questions to ask our speakers, but before I do that, does anybody in the audience have any questions for our speakers today?
Hi, it's Anthony Tatton from Big Cat. My question's for Martin. Often data analysis and insight from data is looking in the rearview mirror. How are you using data to try and predict future needs and future opportunities?
I guess there are two different aspects to that. I think the first and most important is that sometimes historical data is still valid. I think a lot of people are prepared to throw something out. It's not a year old. It's kind of the way that the world works now. That's 2010. That's ancient history. It's not relevant anymore. I don't think most businesses, certainly when you sort of get into a medium-sized businesses, things don't tend to change so quickly that the data becomes irrelevant overnight. It's a case of actually finding interesting trends and the things which perhaps you get an inkling of ahead of time, which is perhaps the most important thing. So you say, okay, well, this business has been running for 10 years. We clearly look at historical data. We don't think anything on the horizon economically or so on is going to impact particularly. However, I'm aware of perhaps a new technology, or there's a new company that's been founded that we think has got an inspiring new product. And something which is, the sort of the creative disruption. It's the possibility of that, something that you just didn't foresee, which by definition is difficult to see. And also, I guess it's also down to quality of data. I think one of the biggest issues we've got is not so much just the fact that you've got the analytical skills required. Often in our business, we we need to find a sort of a biting point between multiple different skills. You need somebody who is a sort of a data technician person. You need somebody who's a computing science person. You need somebody who potentially is some form of statistician sometimes. And you need a designer. There's an interesting project actually, which eventually Aardman might be involved in actually. We've got something called the SAP App House. We've got one in Dublin. We've got one in Stanford University. The founder of SAP is a guy called Hasso Plattner, who's kind of our Bill Gates, and he's a billionaire several times over. He gave $35 million to Stanford University to set up something called the D School, the design school. And that's specifically tailored to actually, creative ways of design thinking. And when you're thinking about, well, how will you recognize these disruptive elements, the things which are perhaps they're relevant kind of now, but will be incredibly relevant 5 years from now? Well, in order to do that, you need to have a sort of creative approach to data investigation and analysis. And it's not just a case now of actually having one person with one skill. It's about actually getting teams together and coming up with creative ways of coming up with forms of analysis and new tools that can do new analyses automatically. Just one thing, for example, just to sort of wrap up, but an example of this is actually very good, is we had some students at the University of Ludwigshafen attend our conference we have an event called TechEd, which takes place. We have 3,000 or 4,000 sort of IT people that attend, and large customers, and the likes of Accenture and IBM are there and everything. It was in Madrid a couple of weeks ago, and I was there with some students. We had a series of sort of dashboard competitions. We had students that designed competitions around UNICEF data to actually take information from donors. It was 50, 60,000 records, for example, for UNICEF to actually create a dashboard. However, it's still sort of fairly standard use of the data. However, a new technology that we call HANA, which is basically an incredibly rapid business intelligence accelerator. It's a piece of software which can enable you to data warehouse, to extract data up to 10,000 times faster than data before. It's something we developed in collaboration with IBM, and it's something, again, that Aardman will almost certainly be involved in. So it's sort of the guy in the know. Something we can't talk about at the moment, is it? But certainly something we'll explore. The idea is this technology is so fast that you can do analysis in real time. And so during the elections, the American elections, we actually had these students, 3 really clever students, that actually ran a feed from Twitter and Facebook using sentiment analysis. So they actually looked for various terms, words, sometimes rude words, and so on, things that were being said in Twitter and Facebook and so on about the two candidates across the different states. And they actually came up with an analysis that predicted the American election result. They actually predicted the final result, including the percentage of all the votes, and they got 80% of the states right. And you think, well, when it gets to the point that you could predict an election, well, all bets are off, you know? So, you know, it was very clever, but one of the things which I also was aware of is the fact that Barack Obama apparently uses this technology, and Mitt Romney didn't. So that in itself is also it's like a virtual cycle, you know? So,
Very quiet crowd, you know. This is like my lecture room normally. Students afraid of asking questions. Yes.
Hello, my name's James Rock. I'd first of all like to thank Martin, since my business is called Design Thinkers. I'd like you to promote it more. Okay. And in fact, we do work in collaboration with SAP at the Hans Plattner Institute in Potsdam. Okay. So I've got a question which is about, having been in business consultancy for about 20 years, you know, most companies seem to focus on business efficiency. Should we be focusing on business effectiveness rather than business efficiency? And that goes to all the panel.
Right. Do you want to start?
Yeah, I think certainly my response to that is yes. I think you know, effectiveness rather than efficiency comes through people being able to do their job and do it really well and do it better. And certainly my perspective on that is in delivering programs, having moved, if you like, beyond business advisory into enabling people through crowdsourcing, is very much that if you get the right enablers in place to deliver the effectiveness, the efficiency comes later as a result of people doing the right thing. So certainly, I would agree with the sentiment. I think it's absolutely right to focus on that.
Yeah, and to add, I think there's two things: that you could do things right, or you can do the right things. And doing things right doesn't necessarily need to get to the better outcomes. So think about what you've been doing in the past, and should that be what you're doing in the future to drive your effectiveness further, for sure.
Thank you. Raj, have anything to?
It's a real important question for the City Council at the moment. Effectiveness or efficiency? I think it's a combination of both, but I think we do need to make a stark choice about how services are delivered, and it's recognising that effectiveness is what we need to be rather than efficiency. So I agree with you that I think the way we structure, the way we look to see the way services are delivered in the future is not about necessarily making sure we try and deliver everything. It's changing the whole remit of what we do, prioritising what we need to do, and making sure that the outcomes we produce are the most effective ones, not just to deliver a service efficiently.
Thank you. Martin, you want to?
I'll use this. Yeah. Try not to headbutt it again. Yeah, I think it's an interesting point. I think the two things I would say really briefly is that, again, coming back to what Keith just said, is that it's partly a reflection of historical information and historical processes, and partly on what it is that you want to do in the future. You know, if you've got a process which has been running for 10 years or something, or you've got a process which you know is fairly standard to the business, and you've got every bit of efficiency out of it, then there's a certain degree of efficiency thinking you can have around that. However, it's not necessarily the case that it's the most effective process. You need to actually think about changing something else or including something in the future. Well, that's a different way of thinking. So I think, in our case, for example, with just in University Alliances, for example, the program that I run, we have sort of standard tools and data sets, for example, that a lot of universities would use, and they get very effective at teaching those curricula and so on. However, if you ask how effective is that and actually generating enthusiasm in the students, well, often you use different tools. So you need to think about the fact that you need to have tools that are on iPad, for example. If you haven't got something on an iPad or an iPhone at the moment, immediately the students just turn off. So one of the crucial things, again, Ardaban is involved with, it's a SciBase curricula. I'm sarcastic, but he's one of my key sort of faculty members. So basically, we have a SciBase, a mobility sort of platform that we're developing to try and raise the enthusiasm amongst the students. So you think of the effectiveness efficiency sort of argument there. There are certain things that you need to do well, and there are certain things that you need to do in a way where you have the business impact that you desired, rather than merely saving money or making it happen as quickly as possible. So yeah, I think I'd agree with you again.
Great, thank you. Anybody else? Okay. So, I mean, how do you guys see the next generation of business transformation evolving for the SMEs? And how do you see from going back to what Roger said, how City can facilitate and support the SMEs to achieve that business transformation in a more effective way? So may I start from Robin?
Yeah. One of the things I guess I'll answer it with a specific example. One of the things we've done recently, we got given a piece of work to design something using crowdsourcing. And it sort of poses an interesting challenge in that we've never done anything with design before. A lot of what we do is about efficiency or transformation within the context of an individual business. And we outsourced it to a business called 99 Designs. I don't know if anybody seen 99 Designs? Anybody used it? What this is a crowdsourced process for people to get designs done. So you put on there your design brief, and it goes to the world. And the world comes up with a design for your problem. In this context, it was designing a particular web asset for a company that was sort of part of what we were trying to do. And a guy in Bulgaria came up with the outline design, and a guy in India developed it. And they did all of that for about £300. And so when you think about the future and our ability as people to make things happen en masse, that starts to unplug some of the potential for the world starting to work together to deliver things and transform things as one group of people. And that's certainly where I see it starting to go. It was certainly insightful for me to be part of that process.
Excellent. Okay. And I think to extend on what Robin says, that the connectivity is very key. The price of entry, anyone can be connected for an SME very inexpensively with lots of bandwidth. And to Raj's point about 100 meg connectivity to small businesses in an affordable way. And that really allows people to capitalize on facilities that are out there, that are in the cloud, that you don't need to build a massive data center. If you have a particularly big data mining development job, you can post that info out there and come back with your answers. And cloud-based services like telephony, like video, like data analysis will be available to many, many people to be able to capitalize on because we are now connected. It'll turn us into a smarter world because of that connectivity.
Thank you. Raj?
I think the approach that we've taken from a city is looking at different business models and how we can transform our services. Certainly, some of the ideas are emerging. Things like cloud computing, as Keith has mentioned, is going to be very important in the way we deliver our services, but also in the way we can potentially connect to our SME sectors and on what opportunities we can provide for that. The city is looking, and it's early days yet, but we are exploring how we can potentially create a hybrid type of cloud environment that will not only enable us to work from anywhere and bring your own devices to work, connections and work from there, but also how we can create that environment that can be extended to the SME sector. So enterprise solutions that are too expensive for you to purchase on your could potentially be leveraged out to yourselves as an opportunity. So I think that it's those type of transforming type of activities that will support businesses moving forward.
Yeah. Thank you. Martin?
Yeah, cool. I kind of reiterate the cloud thing as well. I think one of the key things when you're related again to the design thinking about cloud computing, certainly we've got a series of different products, one of which is Business by Design, for example, used by some of the universities in in teaching, because actually it's a very easy to use tool, and I think that's kind of the point, is that some of the tools and systems that are actually aimed at SMEs have been deliberately made in such a way, first of all, that they're a lot easier to use than the big corporate systems. They're better designed, but also because a lot of the things like the training and so on, we actually provide a whole ton of online training and online resources from a body within SAP called Knowledge Productization, for example, which is basically the conversion of SAP sort of training into easy-to-use tools and concepts, some of them including things like flash demonstrations, that kind of thing. So the whole point is that you actually interact with SMEs in a completely different way, and you have to be very good at design, you have to be very good at simplifying information, and you have to be very effective at communicating. And just as a sort of an addendum to that, actually, we as an industry are sort of following on from some of the other developments that have been taking place in the games industry for a number of years. And I'm actually an avid online gamer. I'm sort of 40 years old. You think, oh, he's still playing on computer games? Well, yes, I was playing on computer games when I was 12. I see no problem with that. But the point is that actually one of the most exciting things that is happening in gaming is cloud computing, effectively. So you've got one thing, for example, that you want to maybe sort of check out if you're ever interested in cloud computing as a concept, is something called Steam, for example, created by a company called Valve. Basically, it's a graphical user interface which downloads onto your computer. Once you've got that, you can purchase and then download games, and it gives you a personalizable interface. I've come to, originally I was very cynical with regards to it, and I used to install everything in DVD until my hard drive broke. And not only did I lose all the games and so on that I've been playing over a period of a year or so, it also meant that I lost other sort of photographs and so on, because I'm a keen photography buff. So now what I do is I upload everything, all of my photography I upload to Flickr. I use Valve a lot, so a lot of the games and so on, and save games and things, are actually held at a centre, probably in the States somewhere, and probably mirrored. And it's a lot easier. If I want to download to a new computer wherever I go, it's easy to do. So I think that's the way, again, it's not specifically, it sounds like it's an IT industry thing, but it isn't, because actually it means that a lot of these things are going to be much easier to use for everybody in the future, and it forces people to make things easy and more effective.
Thank you. So, just want to ask, I guess all the audience, except I can see some of my students between the audience, all the audience are coming from different types of SMEs, is that correct? Yeah? No? How many of you are SMEs? Put your hand up. Okay, how many of you are large enterprises? Okay. So let me ask you questions from the SMEs. Do you see in your market an appetite for a business transformation? And if so, what do you expect from the likes of the Birmingham City Council, the local authorities, the large companies of Cisco and SAP, and your regional thinkers and consultants, people like Clever Together? What is it that you expect? What is it that's missing to facilitate, from your opinion, that business transformation? I think the person at the back. At the back. Finance. The only thing. So you think that if the finance was provided, everything else would be okay? Can we get two people at the front, Laura and Anthony?
Thanks. Not just finance, but also I think there's something about scalability, because you're talking about the larger, medium, larger enterprises. How scalable is the thing to talk about for smaller SMEs, where you're talking about crowdsourcing, for example, or in some of the business here might be 2 to 3 people. So it's the capacity and the capability and the scalability of these kind of ideas.
Okay. Thank you.
I think it's one of you touched on it earlier. It's about helping facilitate for us to do the most with the resources at hand, and which ones to use and when. So I think it's and also access to free or nearly free technology, so that we can that isn't a barrier to entry.
Thank you. gentleman at the back again, he had this.
I'll pick up on your question, your comment that you put things on Flickr. Isn't the problem with using clouds and things like that going to be copyright? It's all very well having collective learning, but if you're contributing to it, some big company's going to take all your ideas or images, because the condition usually is sites like Flickr is they own the copyright on your picture or data or whatever you put up there.
Just to answer that from my point of view, as still a reasonably small SME, we use a platform called SugarSync, which enables you to share documents anywhere in the world in the cloud, but with a very tightly controlled set of protocols that enable you to keep all your IP and everything that you need very close to you. I can still throw away my computer today and access everything that's going on in my world and both in my personal life and my business using these tools, but it's very closed. Whereas something like Flickr, you in effect you're publishing at the same time. So if you're into photography and you're into publishing, but you can also keep it closed in that environment too. But certainly the platforms are more predominantly about publishing, where there are alternatives that allow you to keep control. Certainly we've used that quite a lot.
Excellent. Now,
Actually, can I just say
sure.
one really brief thing? I mean, I'm sort of aware of that as well. I mean, one of the things we did, I mean, specifically with Flickr, I think you've got to have this sort of knowledge of how you deal with some of these tools as well. This is why I'm saying about sort of skills and having this sort of tacit knowledge. I mean, specifically in Flickr's case, for example, what I do is I have a separation between photos that I use for sort of general promotional purposes or showing off purposes, and photography which I actually use on a commercial basis, which I use on a face-to-face basis. So basically nobody sees it online. Any of the materials that I put online, I only ever put in 72 dpi up to a maximum size of 1 meg, for example. So you can try and copy and paste it or download it if you want to, but you're not going to be able to use it because the quality is not going to be very good. You know, so if you want the full 25 meg, 300 dpi, etc., 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 photo which would cover one of these walls, well, you'd have to get in touch with me to actually get hold of it, you know. And I think it's not just with Flickr, it's a lot of other tools that are out there as well. It's about the knowledge of how the industry works. It's about the knowledge of how the tools work and how to make the best of it. And it is possible, if you don't have the right knowledge or the right skill set, and even a certain degree of cynicism, that is the way that you can get tripped up. You know, it's the way of how you defend yourself, but you need to know how to defend yourself, you know, kind of ahead of time. And frankly, in that case, as it happens, my wife is also a photographer and graphic designer, and had she not told me exactly how to make all these various restrictions, including putting a watermark, then it's possible I would have uploaded the full photograph, for example, you know, and you'd be able to go on Flickr and download maybe 300 of my best stuff, you know, so.
Right. So, yeah.
Hi, my name is Tony Guttridge from Coventry University Enterprises. Just a point on finance. There is finance around still for SMEs. It gives me an opportunity to advertise a project I'm working on, which is called Technology Innovation Futures West Midlands. It's ERDF funded, European Regional Development Fund. And it just represents, I guess, at Coventry, one of probably a dozen ERDF projects that are there to support SMEs. One, for example, is called Smarter Working, where you can get 2 free days consultancy to sort of take your business forward. And I guess, you know, Birmingham City University is a co-sponsor here. I guess they've got a number of ERDF funded projects too. So there is some finance around. It might not always match what you want from sort of financial support, but the advice is, I guess, to just look around and see what's available.
Thank you. Yes, we do. We have projects like Keen and KTPs as knowledge transfer, and we do have ERDFs, obviously being a university. So it's 10:05. If anybody has any further questions for our panelists? Yeah?
Can I just ask one more question?
Sure.
You talked about crowdsourcing and international design. Is there an issue with that if it's all well and good having somebody, did you say, sorry, was it in Denmark or Belgium design it?
That example was, I think it ended up being Bulgaria and India sort of collaborating together.
So if it's technology driven, is there an issue if there's a problem with the way that the sort of software or the development program was written? Could it be implanted with viruses? Have you got any comeback? Are there any issues with it? That, from my point of view, would be a concern, that if you're actually developing something for a client and you maybe sort of say resources for you, developed it for you. If there's a problem going forward, ultimately you're responsible, but potentially there's nobody to come back to.
It's a good question. Certainly in the instance we didn't have that type of issue. What 99 Designs enabled us to do was, in effect, build a relationship with lots of people around the world who wanted to contribute to this project. The two that ultimately were selected ended up having a reasonably long relationship with us through that project and beyond. So actually, we kind of, I think if you approached that type of model in a more kind of in a throwaway way, you could end up in that situation where somebody does a piece of work for you, and you've got no comeback on it. The way in which we approached it was we wanted to build a relationship with these people because they were part of our project. That was a sort of wider ongoing thing, and certainly we're still in touch with one of them who's done other work for us since. So I think it's about getting the quality out of it as well and trying to build a quality relationship. I think try not to treat it as something flippant, try and treat it as real business. Certainly, there is the danger that through that type of thing you get work done by a guy in his bedroom at home and you never get anything back for it. And you've just got to be careful. The process helps though. Everybody within who sort of qualifies into a 99 Designs scheme goes through some form of pre-qualification. And all of them, the kind of rate of return they get is quite low. So for example, for every 100 pieces of work they bid for or they go for, they only get 4 or 5, and they're doing this all the time. They run this as a business, all the people who contribute. So it's an interesting model, but it is new. These sorts of things, we've got to try them out, and I'm sure there are people who've had problems with it.
Can I just ask one final question relating to that? Do you think it's going to drive down the quality of the creative industry ultimately? Because it's going to be cost-led rather than a creative solution?
Well, again, I can only talk from our own experience. But my experience in this instance was, and we work with the creative industries quite a lot in the UK and designers in the UK as well. In this particular instance, the competitiveness of it increased the quality, certainly. And whilst the price and cost of it was great, because in effect we were outsourcing the work to overseas markets where the day rates were lower in effect, because you've got hundreds of people competing for that piece of work and submitting their ideas and building relationships with you, and they're able to see at times what each other are doing, it built up the quality of it, definitely. So I think it is a challenge for the industry, though, how you embrace this sort of side of it and the mass market side of it, whilst also, if you like, running a parallel service. But certainly in this instance, it worked well for us.
I can just add one little tiny thing to that, which is simply that with the way that we're approaching sort of design thinking at the moment is being a software company, we have to have a software development business, obviously. And one of the struggles that we're having, but the way we're thinking, is that historically we've had an enormous number of developers, say in obviously Germany in the headquarters. SAP is a German company, in India and so on. However, a lot of the design focuses have been in places like London and Copenhagen and Palo Alto and that kind of thing. So there's actually been a discrepancy. But if you're thinking about the impact on the creative industries, actually I don't see much impact. If anything, I think the design aspects are actually becoming more and more to the fore. It's the development side, the back office side, which gets driven down because so many people are going into it, especially in India. We had a university event in Bangalore, for example, and had another one in Madrid last year. And to give you an idea of the discrepancy in IT skills between the number of countries, in the one in Madrid last year, we had 50 students and 50 professors, and about 25 of the professors came from the UK. The one that we had in Madrid, sorry, not in Madrid, in Bangalore 2 weeks ago, we had 5,000 students and 500 professors in the India market, yeah? But they're on the developer side. The one person that we had on the design side was one guy who was doing a PhD at Stanford University. So there is still, you think at the moment, development and programming is not the same thing as creativity, it's not the same thing as design, and I think at the moment there is still that huge shortfall. A lot of people still that I reach out to when I talk about design are still print designers or they're typography experts. And you think, okay, my wife at the moment is, as it happens, learning how to create dashboards, simply because it's a way of expanding the skill base, and interactivity. But again, she has no intention of becoming a Java programmer, you know. So,
Excellent. So I'm just conscious of the time because we are between you and I think your networking event and the coffee break that you might have. Is that right, Lara? Yeah, correct. So anybody has any further questions? Great. So I'd like to thank our panelists, Keith, Robin, Martin, and Raj, for taking the time this morning and coming and present. I hope it's been a useful session for you guys. And Lara, where is the networking taking place? Is it?
Next steps,
Okay.
will be January 14th.
January 14th.
That will be at Harbour Street at Birmingham City University.
Okay.
If you look at the website, www.hello-business.co.uk, all of the events, you can book by name.
Okay. Thank you very much and have a lovely day. Thank you.